There are moments inside the British royal family that never make the official diary. No press releases, no coordinated statements, no carefully managed photo calls on the steps of a palace. The moment we are about to describe to you was one of those moments, private, deliberate, and decades in the making. And when it finally happened, it sent shockwaves through the walls of Windsor Castle that Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Consort, almost certainly never saw coming. To understand what Prince William has just done, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of his public life, but the beginning of his grief. William was 15 years old when he stood in a suit on the streets of London and walked behind his mother's coffin in front of the entire watching world. He held his face completely still. He placed one foot in front of the other, and he walked. But what was happening behind those eyes was something no child should ever have to carry. He already knew, by that point, that his parents' marriage had fractured not simply because of incompatibility, but because of a specific third presence. His mother had sat him down and told him herself. She had been clear. There were 3 people in that marriage, and the third person had never hidden what she wanted. Princess Diana, in the years before her death, had grown increasingly isolated inside the very institution she had given her life to represent. Sources who were close to her in those final years have spoken about a woman who felt systematically stripped of the protections and privileges that should have surrounded her. Her patronages were challenged. Her standing was questioned. And after her death in August 1997, the erasure that had begun during her lifetime accelerated dramatically. Items associated with her presence in the royal residences were quietly relocated. Fresh flowers she had kept, arrangements she had personally chosen for the spaces she lived in, were removed and not replaced. Rooms she had occupied were sealed. And most significantly for what is happening right now, a portrait that had been commissioned to honor her was never placed in the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor Castle, where it had always been intended to hang. The Hall of Matriarchs is not simply a room with paintings on the wall. It is the most ceremonially significant interior space in the entire Windsor residence when it comes to honoring the women of the British monarchy. Every portrait placed on that wall represents a judgment, a formal institutional statement that this woman mattered, that her life shaped the crown, that her memory belongs to the record of the family. Diana's portrait was meant to be part of that wall. It was never placed there. Instead, it was wrapped, stored, and left in the dark for over 25 years. William spent those 25 years watching. He watched Camilla move into the spaces his mother had lived in. He watched official communications gradually shift, Diana's name appearing less and less, her legacy treated with something that bordered on institutional embarrassment. He watched the Hall of Matriarchs wall remain incomplete, and according to people who know him well, he catalogued all of it, quietly, methodically, without a single public outburst. What William was doing during those years was not grieving passively. He was preparing. The preparation was meticulous in a way that speaks to just how seriously William took this. He did not simply decide one morning to restore his mother's portrait to its rightful place. He spent years studying the institutional protocols governing portrait placement in the royal residences. He consulted curators. He examined the historical records of how every previous placement decision had been made and documented. He built a case so procedurally airtight that once the restoration was executed, there would be no legitimate grounds for reversal. This was not impulsive. This was architectural. William was constructing something that could not be undone. There was one other person inside this family who had been waiting just as long, and whose reasons ran even deeper than William's own grief. That person was Princess Anne. Anne's history with Camilla does not begin with Diana at all. It begins in the early 1970s, when Andrew Parker Bowles was in a serious romantic relationship with Anne herself. The two were close. Marriage had been discussed, but the relationship was blocked on religious grounds. Andrew was Catholic, and Anne, as a senior member of the Church of England line, faced institutional prohibitions that ended the prospect before it could begin. She stepped aside. She had no choice. And shortly afterward, Camilla entered the picture, and Andrew proposed to her, and sat in the pews at their wedding in 1973 and watched the ceremony take place. What followed over the next 5 decades was something Anne observed from a position of unique historical proximity. She watched Camilla become the hidden presence in her brother's marriage to Diana. She watched that marriage collapse. She watched Diana be pushed to the margins of the institution. She watched her sister-in-law die. And then she watched Camilla walk into Buckingham Palace wearing a crown. According to royal observers who have tracked Anne's behavior closely, she has never once bowed to Camilla. She reportedly sought and received permission from the late Queen Elizabeth to be exempt from that particular protocol. And when Camilla became queen consort following the 2022 coronation, Anne's position reportedly did not soften by a single degree. So, when William called, and the two of them understood each other completely, without needing to say very much at all, the call was brief. Both of them had been carrying the same weight, from different angles, for a very long time. The portrait was going up. Diana was coming home. That was the substance of the conversation. And when it ended, both of them knew exactly what the following morning would mean. Camilla had been scheduled for an engagement outside London that day. The scheduling was deliberate. William's team ensured she would be away from Windsor during the hours it would take to complete the restoration. The Hall of Matriarchs was quietly closed to general access. A small group of staff who had been personally vetted handled the work. Nothing appeared on the public royal diary. No statement was drafted. This entire operation took place in silence. The portrait of Princess Diana, which had been sitting in protective storage for more than 2 decades, was carefully brought into the Hall of Matriarchs that evening. Princess, and was present personally. She had insisted on overseeing the placement herself, and nobody who understood what this moment meant to her would have suggested otherwise. When the protective wrapping came off, and Diana's portrait was visible again inside Windsor Castle for the first time in over 20 years, the small group of people in that room went quiet. Multiple staff who were present have described a moment where nobody spoke, where everyone simply stood and looked, and broke the silence. She said, quietly and without ceremony, that Diana had always belonged there. That was it. That was the statement that ended 25 years of institutional silence about what had been done to this woman's memory. A few words, spoken in a room that had been keeping the wrong kind of secret for far too long. The portrait was placed on the wall of the Hall of Matriarchs, directly beside the portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth II. 2 women who shaped the emotional identity of the modern British monarchy, side by side, in the place where history is kept. Diana, who never had the opportunity to reign, but who redefined what royal public service could look like, was finally where she had always been intended to be. The next morning, Camilla returned from her engagement and learned what had happened. By all accounts, the reaction was immediate and intense. She demanded the portrait be removed. She demanded an emergency meeting with William. She turned to Charles and expected him to intervene on her behalf, as he had done throughout their lives together whenever the institution pushed back against her presence. Charles said nothing. He let the decision stand. That silence from Charles is arguably the most significant single moment in this entire sequence of events. This is a man who spent decades fighting to give Camilla a place inside the royal family. He pushed back against public opposition, against his own son's objections, against the institutional reluctance that surrounded her for years. He was her most consistent defender, and in this moment, when she needed him to use that protective instinct one more time, He chose his son. He chose the institution. He chose, perhaps, the woman he had wronged for the better part of 30 years. Princess, and then reportedly entered the room where Camilla was processing all of this, and she delivered 5 words directly to her face. It is what Diana deserved. She did not raise her voice. She did not expand on the statement. She said what needed to be said, and she left it standing in the air. Camilla, by all accounts, had nothing to say in response. There are some statements that don't leave room for a counter. What has unfolded in the days since the Restoration is a broader shift that goes beyond a single portrait. Diana's charitable patronages, the causes she championed with genuine personal commitment, not because the institution directed her to, but because she believed in them, are being reactivated and elevated within the official schedules of William and Catherine's office. Her name is appearing in royal communications with a frequency and a seriousness that has been absent for years. The institutional message is clear, and it is not subtle. The balance of power inside the family has moved. It has moved to William, and William has made his priorities unmistakable. There is a version of this story that frames it as revenge, but that framing misses what William actually spent 25 years doing. Revenge is impulsive. What William executed was restoration, careful, institutional, permanent, and built on a foundation so legally and procedurally solid that no one inside the palace has the standing to dismantle it. He waited until he had the power to do it correctly. He brought in the one person whose involvement made it unassailable, and he did it without a single public statement, without a press briefing, without anything that could be characterized as a provocation. Diana's portrait is on the wall of the Hall of Matriarchs. It is beside Queen Elizabeth. It is where it was always meant to be. And the boy who walked silently behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London in 1997 is now the man who carried her back to the room she was always owed. He made sure nobody could take her down again.